Often, the sinking of a ship happens so quickly that survival rests on split-second decisions. But every so often comes the tragic story of a vessel whose end is slow and drawn out. The Princess Sophia is one such example of a dwindling demise. But rather than being set in a wide expanse of ocean, this steamer, and the 364 people on board, had no choice but to wait for the Grim Reaper on a reef against the snowy backdrop of Alaska. This story starts 6 years after the sinking of the Titanic. The scandal of the unsinkable ship is still fresh in the minds of the passengers and crew alike. But the Princess Sophia was a different kind of steamer, smaller in size, with a more humble reputation of ferrying miners, working folk, up and down the winding channels of the British Columbian coast. Along with its 3 other sister ships in the Princess fleet, it had an air of functionality and robustness. After all, these coastal liners were famed for transporting people and freight to isolated towns, often dubbed pocket liners, for offering the amenities of ocean liners on a small scale. And though they were built to withstand severe weather conditions, despite lacking the splendid awe of luxury like the Titanic, they nonetheless played it safe in protected waters. They were, to an extent, the backbone of many communities whose livelihood and transportation was dependent on these sturdy ships. The captain and crew were trained to be careful. Carefulness was at the heart of their decision. Originally, the hulls were wooden, but an increase in shipwrecks amongst the inside passage. The route that Princess Sophia ran saw the build switch to iron and steel. Given that the inside passage remains an important route even today, conveys the wealth of preparation and knowledge around these voyages. Maps would not have been in a short supply, and it's likely that crew would have manned various ships along the route. Plus, the Princess Sophia was more than capable of riding out in the inside passage, what with her double hull and experience in the storms of around Vancouver Island. Add to that wireless communication, electric lighting, and a recent conversion from coal to oil, and you have a mighty vessel that can brave even the trickiest part of the inner passage. Sure, she wasn't the most flamboyant cruise going, even though her upper class had a piano hall and a lounge paneled in maple, but people felt safe on board. However, familiarity breeds complacency, so it was only a matter of time until bad fortune would test the fortitude of the ship and her crew. There was even a bad omen ahead of her final voyage. On 12 September 1918, Princess Sophia struck a moored fishing patrol from the United States Bureau of Fisheries. Sophia lived to see another day, but the American vessel, Aucklet, sustained significant damage to its deckhouse. All this goes to show that when Sophia hit something, it was the something that got hit. Perhaps this renaissance of her strength led to overconfidence when just a month later, when the Princess Sophia and all 364 people on board died in British Columbia, worst maritime disaster. 23rd October 1918. Princess Sophia is 3 hours behind schedule, and the personnel responsible for getting her from Victoria to Prince Rupert are fully aware of the clock when it finally departed at 10:10 p.m. It's been speculated that the crew was determined to make up time, so this hastiness likely contributed to why they would never reach their final destination. It was on the Lynn Canal, not actually an artificial canal, but a narrow inlet of water, that she encountered a fierce blizzard. The snow was so blinding that Captain Locke resorted to dead reckoning to compensate for visual impairment. This is a technique of crew blowing whistles and measuring the delay in echoes to pinpoint the location in real time on a map. Even with able seamen, it's not the sort of exercise where you'd want to risk a margin of error. Yet, the boat was going full steam ahead, so error was inevitable. So not only was the ship traveling blind through a narrow body of water, it was moving as fast as it could in the dark. Now she was 1 nautical mile off course. There was no way for them to know that just ahead, lying in the thick white sheet of snow, was the Vanderbilt Reef. This small outcropping poking just above the water's surface would become the ship's grave. Usually, the reef is marked by an unlit buoy, which wouldn't have been seen during the night. That said, it probably wouldn't have helped. The powerful currents, deep waters, and gale winds created by the canal make it a risky passage for ships even on good days. Then at 2 a.m., the Princess Sophia grounded on the reef. According to some letters salvaged from the wreck, there was a sense of doom as passengers quickly donned life jackets or evening gowns. A distress call was immediately sent out on the wireless. Even though the signal would have been weak given the tech, the message was received at 2:15 a.m. by the local CPR shipping agent. A rescue flotilla was quickly organized, although it would be many hours until boats arrived. By noon of the next day, the ship had endured tide changes and winds, which only served to push the ship farther onto the reef. Thankfully, the double hull was not breached, so there was no grave sense of panic on board from flooding. Yet the weather meant evacuation would have been impossible. Low tide had too many rocks, but high tide could have smashed lifeboats against the reef. Even with the barometer changed by 1600 hours, she could not be budged without a few tugboats. The captain was careful not to make a wrong decision, having been aware of 2 other shipwrecks in the same area. One that was successfully rescued without evacuation, and one that ended in a saved ship but sunken lifeboats. For the crew, their situation could go either way. They could only do what they had been doing so far: wait. Even when rescue arrived, the captain waved them off with a megaphone. The weather was still dangerous, and though Princess Sophia's bow had broken and was taking on water, evacuation did not happen. But at least now vessels were arriving, even if some had only just received word of distress. All they needed now was a break in the weather, a window of opportunity to transfer passengers across. Friday morning came, 2 full days after Princess Sophia had set off on her journey, and rescuers were getting desperate. There had been no change in the water, and communication difficulties across the limited wireless tech was doing little to soothe the anxieties of everyone there. The USS Cedar, a patrol vessel from the United States Navy, proposed firing a line across to ferry passengers over using breeches buoys, a sort of pulley system with seats. The plan was met with skepticism. Could they really save all 300 or so people on board? Without a better plan, they went for it. Unfortunately, the rescue team failed to anchor twice. The water was too rough, the blizzard too thick. By 1300 hours, the rescue team had to retire to a safer location and even considered using their hulls to protect Princess Sophia from winds. Given that she had withstood the elements so far, they felt confident that they could return the next day to try once again. Alas, they would not have that opportunity. By 1650 hours, Sophia was radioing for immediate assistance. Her batteries were draining, and she could only afford to send out emergency signals. The last message transmitted was, "Talk to me, so I know you are coming." Conditions had worsened. Even with a lighthouse just 500 yards away, its light could not be seen and the foghorn could not be heard. They had now lost both visual and wireless contact with Princess Sophia, and the rescue team had debated trying to search for them in the storm. In the end, they knew it would be futile. They also knew that more ships were coming, 7 in total. With any luck, the storm would be clear by the next morning so they could finally mount their rescue operation. But when visuals did return, the ship was gone. No one saw or heard the sinking, but what they did know is they were too late. All available evidence suggests that the wind and high tide made the boat buoyant, but with the bow still caught on the rocks, it just meant that when the wind spun her around and dragged her across the rocks, and finally, the strong currents, the Princess Sophia simply took on water and sank. Divers would find 100 or so people still in their cabins with many passengers wearing life jackets, yet not a single person survived. Newspapers would be preoccupied with the end of the Great War and the start of the Spanish influenza, so it is that the fate of the Princess Sophia and everyone on board stayed a local news story until now. So what do you think? Did the captain make a grave error not to evacuate earlier, or was disaster inevitable? Let us know in the comments. If you want more videos on maritime disasters, leave a like to let us know, and be sure to share this with someone who enjoys history. As always, be sure to subscribe to be notified of our next video, and stay safe out there.